For me, the arc was to learn film as the first step in photography, and then digital came around, and then the transition, and then now it's the question, am I transitioning back, and for what reasons? For me, of course, I think there is a nostalgic element to it, going back to so-called my roots. But how do you guys feel about that? Do you feel like you're going back? And let's kind of first start by talking about some of our early experiences with film, all right? Can you remember the first roll of film that you shot? Can you remember what was on it or what that was like? Lonnie. Why don't we start with you, Lonnie?
This good friend of mine, Louis, lived in Paris, and I had a little place down the road. He had this weird theater thing. And
do you know how old you were at this time?
In those days, this was probably about 175 years ago. No, not really. I'm not quite that old. No, my first roll of film was, I remember, how nice of you to ask, how nice of you to indulge like all of this stuff, because these are the craziest. Who in the world wants to know this stuff? So, my word, thank you all. Thank you for being here. My Uncle Floyd went to Charleroi, Pennsylvania, and bought, I can't remember what type it was, but he came home with this, this great big box and opened it up and said, "Here, boy, you want to try this out?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. How does it work?" And he sort of unfolds and I was explaining a little bit earlier, this thing. It was huge. I mean, I was only that big, so it was like half my size. He unfolds this huge Polaroid camera and showed me how to work it. And it was a Polaroid land camera. And, it had this big button on the side, and you had to focus the thing, and it was all metal, and you flip open the back, and then you peel off this business, and then you had to peel this smelly, it was sort of a sublime smell, actually. You peel this thing off, and then get the other weird gelatin stuff and smear all over it. So it was all smeary and stinky and totally intoxicating. It was like 30 seconds, and the picture would appear before your eyes. And I thought so I got a paper route, and I started, selling papers to buy, I think it was like $3.67 for 8 photographs. And then you screw up like 6 of them. But the two that you'd keep were just amazing. I still have them. One wound up in the Smithsonian. I mean, one of those from like the 60s. It was, yeah. And I still, until Polaroid stopped making film, I continued to use Polaroid film. Got one box of Type 55 left. Last year I exposed a box of film on the shores of Lake Turkana. And I thought that was my last box, but I found another one. So I'll go back to Lake Turkana this year and expose, I think what I have is my last box. So yeah, I remember really well.
Any other memories of first rolls or first experiences with film in general?
Mine goes, I think as far back.
175 years?
Well, almost. 1839. I still have my first camera. It was given to me by my father, and I think there's a connection between father and son through photography and cameras. And he gave me a Kodak Instamatic with little flash cubes, little magic cubes, and I still have photographs taken with it. And my father, who passed away about 5 years ago, when I was going through his stuff, he saved everything. Collector hoarder, not quite sure. I haven't figured that out yet. But when I was going through his stuff in a box, I opened the box and there was the camera with the manual and a little card. He loved index cards, and said, "Geoffrey's camera." And he saved it with a little string. And I still have pictures taken, and I remember carrying that camera around for many years. I don't know what I got after that, but I clearly remember that camera and how magical it was. And you would get with it the film, which they don't make anymore, with a cartridge, and you would drop it in, and you would bring it to like the drugstore, and they would mail it out to wherever, Kodak, and it would come back, and you'd get these wonderful prints with this wonderful color and these little white borders. And I still have many of those photos, and they were really, really quite magical. Mostly of my family and around, going on little trips and things like that.
I processed a roll of film like that not that long ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was very difficult because I don't have the reels for that or anything. No one does.
Was it film that was recently shot that was old, or was it?
No, old.
No.
And someone was like, "What's this? Like, can you do it?" And I took it not knowing what it was, and I was just like, "Yeah, I can do it." And I looked at it and I was like, "I don't think I can do this. What do I do?" But I figured it out. I taped it to another roll of film.
Wow, yeah, ingenuity.
It did
yeah.
work. It worked. It came out. I mean, it was very.
And they were old
bugged.
images from back in the day?
Yes.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's great. I love
Yeah,
that.
it was
You
very
found
cool.
treasures.
Yeah. Yeah, I get a lot of that actually. Old film. Like I did a roll of Kodachrome a couple weeks ago.
Oh, how'd that come out?
It
How'd you
like
do that?
barely came out. There was actually the emulsion had molded, so there were like mold spores
Oh,
on
wow.
the images. But there were images,
That's
and they
art.
looked
That's
very
art.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Splitting.
Yeah. But my first photography experiences in the darkroom was high school. Our high school had actually a really nice darkroom, and most of the students considered that class to be sort of a, throwaway class, like an easy A type of class. And me being a freshman in high school was like, yeah, I don't care about this either. This is just an easy A for me, but I loved it. I was always there, and my teachers, they all knew me. There were 2 photo teachers. They knew me really well. And even after the class was over, I would still continue to go there, and I would ditch other classes to go to the darkroom. They would sign slips for me and be like, yeah, Rachel is doing homework, So that was how I got into it. Never stopped.
And what was your first role, Birgit? Coming from
I think
digital?
Well, that was even before my digital thing. I did shoot film a little bit, but just to try it out as a kid. I remember my very first role was when I stole my parents' point and shoot camera that was only for special occasions. And I just went around the house and shot the whole roll. My mom got super mad with me, and photos were whatever, but I do remember some of them. But then not long later, my dad, I had a similar experience with like the dad bonding thing. My dad figured out that we could have a common hobby, and bought me a SLR, a Reviflex off of eBay, and he explained everything to me, and it was the first time that he sat down with me and I listened, and I was into it as well, and he got super excited. And and then even then he told me my grandfather, his father, who had just passed away, was a big photographer or hobby photographer as well, and I, being like maybe 10 or something, I was like, oh, that's exciting. Like now I want to do it even more so, because I want to have this connection with my dad and my grandfather. And and that's how I started shooting in general. And then school ruined it with digital a little bit, but I found the way back.